Éliphas Lévi. Divine Synthesis and Realization of Magic by the Christian Revelation. Chapter 1. Christ accused of magic by the Jews. At the beginning of the Gospel, according to St. John, there is one sentence which is never uttered by the Catholic Church, except in the bending of the knees. That sentence is, "The Word was made flesh." The plenary revelation of Christianity is comprised therein. So also elsewhere the evangelist furnishes the criterion of orthodoxy, which is the confession of Jesus Christ manifested in flesh, that is to say, in visible and human reality. After emblazoning in his visions the pantacles and hieroglyphs of esoteric science, after exhibiting wheels revolving within wheels, after picturing living eyes turning to all the spheres, after deploying the beating wings of the four mysterious living creatures, Ezekiel, the most profound Kabbalist of the ancient prophets, beholds nothing but a plain strewn with dry bones. At his word they are covered with flesh, and so is form restored to them. A pitiful beauty invests these remnants of death, but that beauty is cold and lifeless. Of such were the doctrines and mythologies of the elder world, when a breath of love descended upon them from heaven. Then the dead shapes rose up, the wraiths of philosophy gave place to men of true wisdom, the Word was incarnate and alive, it was no longer the day of abstractions but one of reality. That faith which is proved by works replaced the hypotheses which ended in nothing but fables. Magic was transformed into sanctity, wonders became miracles, the common people, excluded by ancient initiation, were called to the royalty and priesthood of virtue. Realization is thus of the essence of Christian religion, and its doctrine gives a body even to the most obvious allegories. The house of the young man who had great possessions is still shown in Jerusalem, and it might be in no sense impossible for careful research to discover a lamp which, by a similar tradition, once belonged to one of the foolish virgins. Such ingenuous credulities are fundamentally not very dangerous. Indeed, they prove only the living and realizing power of the Christian faith. The Jews accused that faith of having materialized belief and idealized earthly things. In our doctrine and ritual of transcendental magic, we have recited the scandalous parable of the Seper Toldos Jeshu, which was invented to support the accusation. It is related in the Talmud that Jesus ben Sabta, or the son of the divorced woman, having studied profane mysteries in Egypt, set up a false stone in Israel and led the people into idolatry. It was acknowledged notwithstanding that the Jewish priesthood did wrong when it cursed him with both hands. And it is in this connection that we find in the Talmud one beautiful precept which is destined hereafter to unite Christendom and Israel. Never curse with both hands, so that one of them may always be free to forgive and to bless. As a fact, the priesthood was guilty of injustice towards that peace-bringing master who counseled his disciples to obey the constituted hierarchy. "They are in the seat of Moses," the Savior said. "Do therefore that which they tell you, but not as they do themselves." On another occasion he commanded 10 lepers to shew their persons to the priests, and they were cured on the road. What touching abnegation in the divine worker of miracles, who thus ascribed to his most deadly enemies the very honor of his miracles, I are the rest. Were those who accused Christ of setting up a spurious cornerstone acquainted themselves with the true one? Had not the Jews in the days of the Pharisees lost the science of that which is at once the cornerstone, the cubic stone, the philosophical stone, in a word, the fundamental stone of the Kabbalistic temple, square at the base and triangular above like the pyramids? By impeaching Jesus as an innovator, did they not proclaim that they had themselves forgotten antiquity? Was not that light which Abraham saw and rejoiced extinguished for the unfaithful children of Moses, and was it not recovered by Jesus, who made it shine with a new splendor? To be quite certain on the subject, the Gospel and Apocalypse of St. John must be compared with the mysterious doctrines of the Sefer Yetzirah and Zohar. It will then be realized that Christianity, so far from being a heresy in Israel, was the true Orthodox tradition of Jewry, while it was the scribes and Pharisees who were sectarians. Furthermore, Christian orthodoxy is proved by the consent of the world at large and by the suspension of the sovereign priesthood, together with the perpetual sacrifice in Israel, the two indisputable marks of a true religion. Judaism without a temple, without a high priest, and without a sacrifice survives only as a dissident persuasion. Certain persons are still Jews, but the temple and altar are Christian. There is a beautiful allegorical exposition in the apocryphal Gospels of this criterion of certitude in respect of Christianity. Its evidence is that of realization. Some children were amusing themselves by fashioning birds of clay, and among them was the child Jesus. Each little artist praised his own work, and only Jesus said nothing. But when he had molded his birds, he clapped his hands, telling them to fly, and they flew. So did Christian institutions shew their superiority over those of the ancient world. The latter are dead, but Christianity is alive. Considered as the fully realized and vital expression of the Kabbalah, that is to say, of primitive tradition, Christianity is still unknown. And hence that Kabbalistic and prophetic book, called the Apocalypse, yet remains to be explained, being incomprehensible without the Kabbalistic keys. The traditional interpretation was long preserved by the Johannites, or disciples of St. John. But the Gnostics intervened, to the total confusion and loss of everything, as will be made clear at a later stage. We read in the Acts of the Apostles that St. Paul at Ephesus collected all the books which treated of things curious and burnt them in public. The reference is no doubt to the old Goetic texts, or works of necromancy. The loss is regrettable assuredly, since even from the memorials of error there may shine some rays of truth, while information may consequently be derived which will prove precious to science. It is a matter of general knowledge that at the advent of Christ Jesus the oracles were silenced everywhere, and a voice went wailing over the sea, crying, "Great Pan is dead." A pagan writer, who takes exception to the report, declares on his own part that the oracles did not cease, but in a little while no one was found to consult them. The rectification is valuable, for such an attempted justification is more conclusive than the pretended calumny. Much the same thing should be said concerning the works of wonder, which fell into contempt in the presence of real miracles. As a fact, if the higher laws of nature are obedient to true moral superiority, miracles become supernatural like the virtues which produce them. This theory detracts nothing from the power of God, while the fact that the astral light is obedient to the superior light of grace signifies in reality for us that the old serpent of allegory places its vanquished head beneath the foot of the Queen of Heaven. Chapter 2. The witness of magic to Christianity. Magic, being the science of universal equilibrium and having the truth, reality, and reason of being for its absolute principle, accounts for all the antinomies and reconciles all actualities which are in conflict one with another by the one generating principle of every synthesis. That harmony results from the analogy of opposite. The initiate of this science religion is not in doubt because it exists, and we do not deny what is. Being is being. The apparent opposition of religion and reason is the strength of both, establishing each in its distinct domain and fructifying the negative side of each by the positive side of the other. As we have just said, it is the attainment of agreement by the correspondence between things that are contrary. The cause of all religious errors and confusions is that, in ignorance of this great law, it has been sought to make religion a philosophy and philosophy in its turn a religion. Subjecting matters of faith to the processes of science, which is no less ridiculous than the subjection of science to the blind obedience of faith. It is no more the province of a theologian to affirm a mathematical absurdity or reject the demonstration of a theorem than it is the province of a man of learning, in the name of science, to oppose or maintain the mysteries of dogma. If we inquire of the Academy of Sciences whether it is mathematically true that there are three persons in one God, and whether, on the basis of physiology, it can be certified that Mary, the Mother of God, was conceived immaculate, the Academy of Sciences will decline to judge thereon, and it will be right. Scholarship has no title to pronounce, as the questions belong to the realm of faith. An article of faith is believed or is not believed, but in either case it is not a matter of discussion. It is of faith precisely because it eludes examination by science. When Joseph de Maistre assures us that one of these days we shall speak in terms of wonder about our actual stupidity, he is referring, no doubt, to those people of pretended strong mind who daily inform us that they will believe in the truth of a dogma when it has been proved scientifically. This is equivalent to saying that they will believe when nothing is left for believing, when dogma as such is destroyed, having become a scientific theorem. It is another way of suggesting that we shall confess to the infinite when it has been explained, determined, circumscribed, defined, or, in a word, changed into the finite. We will believe in the infinite when we are quite certain that it does not exist. We will admit the immensity of the ocean when we see it put into bottles. But then, my friends, that which has been proved to you and brought within your comprehension is henceforth a matter of knowledge and not of faith. On the other hand, if you are informed that the Pope has decided that 2 and 2 acts not 4, and that the square of the hypotenuse is not equal to the squares drawn on the 2 other sides of a right-angled triangle, you would be justified in replying that the Pope has not so decided because he has no title. These things do not concern him, and he may not meddle therein. Here a disciple of Rousseau will exclaim that this is all very well, but the Church does require us to believe in things which are in formal opposition to mathematics. All mathematical science tells us that the whole is greater than the part. This notwithstanding, when Jesus Christ communicates with his disciples, he must hold his entire body in his hand and put his head in his own mouth. The miserable pleasantry in question occurs textually in Rousseau. It is easy to answer that the sophist is confounding science with faith and the natural order with that which is supernatural or divine. Were it claimed by religion that in the communication of the Eucharist our Savior had 2 natural bodies of the same form and size, and that one was eaten by the other, science would be entitled to protest. But religion lays down that the body of the Master is divinely and sacramentally contained under the natural sign or appearance of a fragment of bread. Once more, it is a question of believing or not believing. Whosoever reasons thereon and discusses the thing scientifically deserves to be classed as a fool. 1. Truth in science is proved by exact demonstrations. Truth in religion is proved by unanimity of faith and holiness of works. We have authority in the gospel to recognize that he who could say to the paralytic, "Take up thy bed and walk," had the right to forgive sins. Religion is true if it is the realization of perfect morality. Works are the proof of faith. It is permissible to ask science whether Christianity has constituted a vast association of men for whom the hierarchy is a principle, obedience the rule, and charity a law. If science answers, on the basis of historical documents, that this is the case but that the association of Christians has failed in the matter of charity, then I take it at its own word, which admits the existence of charity, since it recognizes that there can be deficiency therein. Charity is at once a great word and a great thing. It is a word which did not exist prior to Christianity, and that which it stands for is the sum total of religion. Is not the spirit of charity the divine spirit made visible on earth? Has not this spirit manifested its sensible existence by acts, institutions, monuments, and by immortal works? To be brief, we do not understand how a skeptic, who is a man of good faith, can see a daughter of Saint Vincent Delaware Paul without wishing to kneel and pray. The spirit of charity, this indeed is God. It is immortality in the soul. It is the hierarchy, obedience, the forgiveness of injuries, the simplicity and integrity of faith. The separated sects are death-struck at the root because in separating they were wanting in charity, while in trying to reason on faith they were wanting in simple good sense. It is in the sects that dogma is absurd because it is pseudo-reasonable. As such it must be a scientific theorem or nothing. Now, in religion we know that the letter kills and that the spirit alone gives life. But what is the spirit in question unless it be that of charity? The faith which moves mountains and withstands martyrdom, the generosity which gives all, the eloquence which speaks with the tongue of men and angels, all this, says St. Paul, is nothing without charity. He adds that knowledge may vanish away and prophecy may cease, but charity is eternal. Charity and its works, hereof is the reality in religion. Now, true reason never denies reality, for it is the demonstration of that being which is truth. It is in this manner that philosophy extends a hand to religion, but without ever wishing to usurp its domain, and, on this condition, religion blesses, encourages and enlightens philosophy by its loving splendors. Charity is the mysterious bond which, according to the dream of Greek initiates, must reconcile Eros and Anteros. It is that coping of the door of Solomon's temple which unites the two pillars Jachin and Boaz. It is the common guarantee between rights and duties, between authority and liberty, between the strong and weak, between the people and the government, man also and woman. It is the divine sentiment which is requisite for life in human science. It is the absolute of good, as the triple principle being reality reason is the absolute of the true. These elucidations have been necessary for the proper interpretation of that beautiful symbol of the Magi adoring the Savior in the manger. The kings are three, one white, one tawny, and one black. They offer gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The reconciliation of opposites is expressed by this double triad, and it is precisely that which we have just been seeking to explain. Christianity, as expected by the Magi, was in effect the consequence of their secret doctrine, but this Benjamin of ancient Israel caused, by the fact of its birth, the death of its mother. The magic of light, that of the true Zoroaster, of Melchizedek and Abraham, came to an end with the advent of the great fulfiller. Henceforth, in a world of miracles, mere prodigies could be nothing more than a scandal, and magical orthodoxy was transfigured into the orthodoxy of religion. Those who dissented could be only Illuminati and sorcerers. The very name of magic could be interpreted only according to its evil sense, and it is under this inhibition that we shall follow hereafter its manifestations through the centuries. The first arch-heretic mentioned in the traditions of the Church was Simon the magician. His legend embodies a multitude of marvels. It is an integral part of our subject, and we shall endeavor to separate its basis from the cloud of fables by which it is surrounded. Simon was by nationality a Jew and is believed to have been born in the Samaritan town of Gittin. His master in magic was a sectarian named Dositheus, who gave out that he was sent by God and was the Messiah foretold by the prophets. 2 Under his tuition Simon not only acquired the illusory arts but also certain natural secrets which belong really to the tradition of the Magi. He possessed the science of the astral Sirae and could attract great currents thereof, making himself seem impassible and incombustible. He had also the power to rise and remain in the air. Feats of this kind have been performed frequently, in the absence of science and, so to speak, accidentally, by enthusiasts intoxicated with astral light, as for example the convulsionaries of Saint Medard, and the phenomena recur at the present day in the mediumistic state. Simon magnetized at a distance those who believed in him and appeared to them under various figures. He produced images and visible reflections, e.g., everyone, on a certain occasion, thinking that they could see fantastic trees in a bare country. Moreover, objects which are normally inanimate were moved in his vicinity, as furniture is now moved within the atmosphere of home, the American. And, finally, when he intended to enter or leave a house, the doors creaked, shook, and ended by opening of their own accord. Simon performed these wonders before the chief people of Samaria, and as his actual achievements were in due course exaggerated, the thaumaturgist passed for a divine being. It came about also that as he owed his power to states of excitement by which reason is disturbed, so he came to regard himself as such an exceptional being that he did not hesitate to claim divine honors and dreamed modestly of usurping the worship of the whole world. His crises or ecstasies produced extraordinary physical result. Sometimes he appeared pale, withered, broken, like an old man at the point of death. Sometimes the luminous fluid revitalized his blood, so that his eyes shone, his skin became smooth and soft, and he appeared regenerated and renewed suddenly. The Easterns have great capacity for the amplification of wonders. They claimed to have seen Simon passing from childhood to decrepitude and again at his will returning from decrepitude into childhood. His miracles were noised abroad everywhere, till he became not only the idol of Jewish Samaria but also of the neighboring countries. However, the worshippers of marvels are generally hungry for new emotions, and they did not fail to get weary of that which at first had astonished them. The apostle Saint Philip having reached Samaria, to preach the gospel therein, a new current of enthusiasm was thus started, with the result that Simon lost all his prestige. He was conscious, moreover, that his abnormal states had ceased, as he thought through loss of power. He believed that he was surpassed by magicians more learned than himself, and the course which he took was to attach himself to the apostles in the hope of studying, discovering, or buying their secret. Simon was certainly not an initiate of transcendental magic, which would have told him that wisdom and sanctity are needful for those who would direct the secret forces of nature without being broken thereby. That to play with such terrible weapons without understanding them was the act of a fool, and that swift and terrible death awaits those who profane the sanctuary of nature. Simon was consumed by an unquenchable thirst, like that of a drunkard. The suspension of his ecstasy was the loss of all his happiness, and made ill by past excesses, he thought to regain health in renewed intoxication. One does not willingly come back to the state of a simple mortal after posing as a god. To recover that which he had lost, Simon submitted therefore to all the rigors of apostolic austerity. He watched, he prayed, he fasted, but the wonders did not return. Then he reflected that between Jews it might be possible to reach an understanding, and he offered money to St. Peter. The chief of the apostles drove him indignantly away, and he who received so willingly the contributions of his disciples was now at the end of his resources. He abandoned forthwith the society of men who had shown such disinterestedness, and with the money which St. Peter disdained, he purchased a female slave named Helena. Mystical vagaries are always akin to debauch. Simon became passionately enamored of his servant. That passion, at once weakening and exalting, restored his cataleptic states and the morbid phenomena which he termed his gifts of wonders. A mythology full of magical reminiscences, combined with erotic dreams, issued fully armed from his brain. He undertook pilgrimages like the apostles, carrying Helena with him, dogmatizing and shewing himself to those who were willing to worship and doubtless also to pay him. According to Simon, the first manifestation of God was by means of a perfect splendor which produced its reflection immediately. He was himself this Son of Souls, and the reflection was Helena, whom he affected to call Selene, being the name of the moon in Greek. Now the moon of Simon came down at the beginning of the ages on that earth which the Magus had mapped out in his perpetual dreams. There she became a mother, impregnated by the thought of his Son, and she brought into the world angels, whom she reared by herself without speaking of them to their father. The angels rebelled against her and imprisoned her in a mortal body. It was then that the splendor of God was compelled to descend in its turn, that it might redeem Helena, and so the Jew Simon was manifested on earth. There he had to overcome death and carry his Helena through the air, followed by the triumphant choir of the elect, while the rest of mankind was abandoned on earth to the eternal tyranny of the angels. Thus the arch-heretic, imitating Christianity but in the reverse sense, affirmed the eternal reign of revolt and evil, represented the world as created or at least completed by demons, destroyed the order and the hierarchy, to pose alone with his concubine as the way, the truth, and the life. Here was the doctrine of Antichrist, and it was not to perish with Simon, for it has been perpetuated to our own days. Indeed, prophetic traditions of Christianity speak of his transitory reign and triumph to come as heralding the most terrible calamities. Simon claimed the title of saint and, by a curious coincidence, the chief of a modern Gnostic sect which recalls all the sensuous mysticism of the first arch-heretic, the inventor of the free woman, is also named Saint Simon. Cainism is the name which might be given to all the false revelations issued from this impure source. They are dogmas of malediction and of hatred against universal harmony and social order. They are disordered passions affirming license in the place of duty, sensual love instead of chaste and devoted love, the prostitute in place of the mother, and Helena, concubine of Simon, in place of Mary, the mother of the Savior. Simon became a notoriety and repaired to Rome, where the emperor, attracted by all extraordinary spectacles, was disposed to welcome him. This emperor was Nero. The illuminated Jew astonished the crowned fool by a trick which is common in jugglery. He was decapitated, but afterwards saluted the emperor, his head being restored to his shoulders. He caused furniture to move and doors to open. In a word, he acted as a veritable medium and became sorcerer in ordinary at the orgies of Nero and the banquets of Trimalcion. According to the legend makers, it was to rescue the Jews of Rome from the doctrine of Simon that St. Peter himself visited that capital of the world. Nero, by means of his inferior spies, was informed speedily that a new worker of Israelitish wonders had arrived to make war on his own enchanter, and he resolved to bring them together for his amusement. Petronius and Tigellinus were perhaps at this feast. "May peace be with you," said the Prince of Apostles on entering. "We have nothing to do with your peace," answered Simon. "It is by war that truth is discovered. Peace between adversaries is the victory of one and the defeat of the other." St. Peter answered, "Why do you reject peace? The vices of men have created war, but peace ever abides with virtue." "Virtue is power and skill," said Simon. "So myself I face the fire, I rise in the air, I restore plants, I change stones into bread. And you, what do you do?" "I pray for you," said St. Peter, "that you may not perish the victim of your enchantments. Keep your prayers, they will not ascend to heaven as quickly as myself." And behold the magician passing out by a window and rising in the air outside. Whether this was accomplished by means of some aerostatic apparatus concealed under his long robes, or whether he was lifted up, like the convulsionarls of Paris the deacon, owing to an exaltation of the astral light, we are unable to say. But during this phenomenon St. Peter was praying on his knees, and Simon fell suddenly with a great cry, to be raised with his thighs broken. Nero imprisoned St. Peter, who seemed a far less diverting magician than Simon. The latter died of his fall. The whole of this history, which belongs to the popular rumors of the period, is now relegated, though perhaps wrongly, to the region of apocryphal legends. 1. On such account it is not less remarkable or less worthy to be preserved. The sect of Simon did not end with himself, and his successor was one of his disciples, named Menander. 2. He did not pose as a god, being contented with the role of a prophet. But when he baptized proselytes, a visible fire came down upon the water. He also promised immortality of soul and body as the result of this magical immersion, and in the days of Saint Justin, there were still followers of Menander who firmly believed themselves immortal. The deaths which occurred among them by no means disabused the others, for those who died were excommunicated forthwith, on the ground that they had been false brethren. These believers' death was an actual apostasy, and their immortal ranks were filled up by enrolling new proselyte. Those who understand the extent of human folly will not be surprised to hear that in this present year, being 1858, there exists in America and Crance a fanatical sect in continuation of that of Menander. The qualification of magician added to the name of Simon rendered magic a thing of horror to Christians. But they did not on this account cease to honor the memory of the Magi kings who adored the Savior in his cradle. Chapter 3. The Devil. By its clear formulation of concepts respecting the divine, Christianity leads us to the understanding of God as the most absolute and the most purest love, while it defines, not less clearly, the spirit which is opposed to God, the spirit of revolt and hatred. Hereof is Satan. But this spirit is not a personality and is not to be regarded as a kind of black god. It is a perversity which is common to all extralineal intelligences. My name is Legion, says Satan in the Gospel, for we are many. The birth of intelligence may be compared to the star of the morning, and, after it has shone for an instant, if it fall of its own accord into the void of darkness, we may apply to it that apostrophe which was uttered by Isaiah to the king of Babylon. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? But does this mean that the celestial Lucifer, the morning star of intelligence, has been changed into a brand of hell? Can the name of light-bearer be applied justly to the angel of trespass and of darkness? We think not, more especially if it be understood, as we understand, who have the magical tradition behind us, that the hell personified by Satan and symbolized by the old serpent is that central fire which encompasses the earth, consuming all that it produces and devouring its own tail, like the serpent of Kronos, in a word, that astral light of which the Almighty spoke to Cain when he said, If thou doest evil, sin shall be straightway at thy gates. That is to say, disorder will take possession of all thy senses. Yet unto thee I have made subject the lust of death, and it is for thee to rule it. The royal and almost divine personification of Satan is a blunder which goes back to the false Zoroaster or, otherwise, to the sophisticated doctrine of the later and materialistic Magi of Persia. It was they who represented the two poles of the intellectual world as deities, making a divinity out of passive force in contradistinction to that force which is active. We have indicated that the same grave error was made by Indian mythology. Ahriman, or Shiva, is the father of the demon, as the latter is understood by superstitious makers of legend, and hence it was said by our Savior, "The devil is a liar like his father." On this question the Church rests satisfied with the Gospel texts and has published no dogmatic decisions, having the definition of the devil as their object. Good Christians avoid even naming him, while religious moralists recommend the faithful to take no concern regarding him, seeking to resist his arts by thinking only of God. We cannot but admire this wise reserve on the part of priestly teaching. Why indeed should the light of doctrine be reflected on him who is intellectual obscurity and darkest night of the heart? Let the spirit which would distract us from the knowledge of God remain unknown by us. It is assuredly not of our intention to perform what the Church has omitted. We certify on such a subject only as to the secret instruction of initiates in the occult sciences. They have said that the great magical agent, accurately termed Lucifer because it is the vehicle of light and the receptacle of all forms, is a mediating force diffused throughout creation. That it serves for creation and destruction, that the fall of Adam was an erotic intoxication which made his race subject to that fatal light. That all amorous passion which invades the senses is a whirlpool of this light, seeking to draw us down into the gulf of death. That madness, hallucinations, visions, ecstasies, constitute an exceedingly dangerous exaltation of this interior phosphorus. Finally, that the light in question is of the nature of fire, that it is warming and vivifying in its prudent use, but that it burns, dissolves, and destroys in its excess. Over this light man is called, on the one hand, to assume a sovereign empire, so earning his immortality, but, on the other, he is menaced by the intoxication, absorption, and eternal destruction thereof. In its devouring, avenging, and fatal aspect the astral light may be called the fire of hell, the serpent of legend, while the tormented sin which abounds therein. The tears and the gnashing of teeth on the part of the abortions that it consumes, the phantom of life which escapes them and seems to insult their misery, all this may be termed the devil or Satan. Among the pomps and works of hell may be included, in fine, those actions, those illusionary images of pleasure, wealth, and glory which are misdirected by the vertigo of this light. Father Hilarion Tizot regards certain nervous diseases which are accompanied by hallucinations and delirium as diabolical possessions, and, understood in the sense of the Kabbalist, he is right assuredly. Whatsoever delivers our soul to the fatality of vertigo is truly infernal, since heaven is the eternal reign of order, intelligence, and liberty. The possessed people of the gospel fled away from Jesus Christ. The oracles were silenced in the presence of the apostles. While those who are prey to the disease of hallucination have ever manifested an invincible repugnance for initiates and sages. The suspension of oracles and obsessions proved the triumph of human liberty over fatality. When astral diseases reappear, it is an ominous sign of spiritual enervation, and manifestations of this kind are followed invariably by fatal disorders. The disturbances here referred to continued till the French Revolution, and the fanatics of Saint Medard were the prophets of its sanguinary calamities. The famous criminologist Torreblanca, who had gone to the root of diabolical magic, described accurately all the phenomena of astral disturbance when classifying the works of the demon. Here are some extracts from the 15th chapter of his work on operative magic. 1:1. The demon is endeavoring continually to lead us into error. 2. He deludes the senses by disturbing the imagination, though he cannot change its nature. 3. When things abnormal are manifested to the eye of man, an imaginary body assumes shape in the mind, and so long as that phantom remains therein the phenomena continue. 4. The demon destroys equilibrium in the imagination by a disturbance of the vital functions, whether by irregularity in health or actual disease. 5. When some morbid cause has destroyed this equilibrium, and that also of reason, waking dream becomes possible, and that which has no existence assumes the semblance of reality. 6. The mental perception of images in this manner makes sight unworthy of trust. 7. Visions are bodied forth, but they are merely thought forms. 8. The ancients distinguished two orders of disease, one of them being the perception of imaginary forms, which was termed frenzy, and the other carabantism. or the hearing of voices and other sounds which have no existence. It follows from these statements, which are curious in several respects, that disease is attributed by Torreblanca to the demon, who indeed is disease itself, with which we should agree entirely, if permitted by dogmatic authority. The recurring efforts of the astral light to disintegrate and absorb entities are part of its nature. Its ceaseless currents have a wearing effect like water, and it consumes even as fire, for it is the very essence and dissolving force of fire. The spirit of perversity and the love of destruction which chai at dot series those whom it governs are instincts of this force. They are further consequent on the suffering of the soul, which is conscious of incomplete life and feels torn in opposite directions. The soul yearns to make an end of itself, yet fears to die alone, and therefore would include all creation in its destruction. Such astral perversity assumes frequently the form of the hatred of children. An unknown power impels certain subjects to kill them, and imperious voices seem to demand their death. Dr. Brière de Boismont cites terrible examples of this mania, recalling the crimes of Papavoine and Henriette Cornier. Sufferers from astral perversion are malevolent, and they are jealous at the joy of others. They are especially inimical to hope, and even when offering consolation they choose the most desperate and heartrending figures of speech. The explanation is that their life is synonymous with suffering and that they have been whirled into the dance of death. It is, moreover, astral perversion and the lust of death which abuses the act of generation, leading to its perversion or dishonor by sacrilegious mockeries and shameful pleasantries. Obscenity is a blasphemy against youth. Each of these vices is personified by a black idol or by a demon, which is the negative and distorted reflection of the divinity who communicates life. These are idols of death. Moloch is the fatality which devours infant. Satan and Nisroch are gods of hatred, fatality, and despair. Astarte, Lilith, Nahama, Ashtaroth are idols of debauchery and abortion. Adramelech is the god of murder, while Belial is that of eternal revolt and anarchy. Such are the monstrous conceptions of reason, when it pauses on the verge of extinction and slavishly worships its destroyer, so that it may reach the end of its torment by the destroyer absorbing it. According to the Kabbalists, the true name of Satan is that of Jehovah reversed, for Satan is not a black god but the negation of deity. He is the personification of atheism and idolatry. The devil is not a personality for initiates but a force created with a good object, though it can be applied to evil. It is really the instrument of liberty. They represented this force, which presides over physical generation, under the mythological figure of the horned god Pan, and hence comes the goat of the Sabbath, brother of the old serpent, the light-bearer or phosphorus, converted by poets into the false Lucifer of legend. Chapter 4. The Last Pagans. The eternal miracle of God is the unchangeable odor of His providence in the harmonies of nature. Prodigies are derangements and are attributable only to degeneration in the creature. Divine miracle is thus a providential reaction for the restoration of the broken order. When Jesus cured the possessed, He calmed them and suspended the marvels which they produced. When the apostles subdued the exaltation of the Pythonesses, they put an end to divination. The spirit of error is a spirit of agitation and subversion. The spirit of truth brings tranquility and peace in its path. Such was the civilizing influence of Christianity at its dawn, but those passions which are friends of disturbance did not, without a struggle, leave it in possession of the palm of easy victory. Expiring polytheism drew powers from the magic of the old sanctuaries. To the mysteries of the gospel it still opposed those of Eleusis. Apollonius of Tyana was set up as a parallel to the Savior of the world, and Philostratus undertook to construct a legend on the subject of this new deity. Thereafter came the Emperor Julian, who would have been himself deified if the javelin which slew him had not also struck the last blow at Caesarean idolatry. The enforced and decrepit rebirth of a religion which was dead in its forms was a literal abortion, and Julian, who attempted it, was doomed to perish with the senile offspring which he strove to bring into the world. This notwithstanding, Apollonius and Julian were two curious, even great, personalities, and their history is epoch-making in the annals of magic. Allegorical legends were in fashion at that period. Those who were masters embodied their doctrine in their personality, and those who were initiated disciples wrote fables which combined the secrets of initiation. The history of Apollonius by Philostratus, too absurd if it be taken literally, becomes memorable when its symbolism is examined according to the data of science. It is a kind of pagan gospel, opposed to that of Christianity. It is a secret doctrine at large, and we are in a position to reconstruct and explain it. In the third book of Philostratus, the initial chapter contains an account of Hyphasis, a wonderful river which rises in a certain plain and is lost in unapproachable regions. That river represents magical knowledge, which is simple in its first principles but difficult to deduce accurately in respect of final consequences. Philostratus tells us in this connection that marriages are not fruitful unless consecrated by the balsam of trees which grow on the banks of Hyphasis. The fish of this river are sacred to Venus. Their crest is blue, the scales are of many colors, and their tail is golden. They can raise the tail at will. In the river there is also an animal resembling a white worm, the stewing of which produces an inflammable oil that can be kept in glass only. The animal is reserved only for the king's service, as it has power to overthrow walls. When the grease of it is exposed to the air it ignites, and there is then nothing in the whole world with which the flame can be extinguished. By the fish of the river Hyphasis, Apollonius signifies universal configuration, which magnetic experiments have recently proved to be blue on one side, golden on that which is opposite, and of many colors at the center. The white worm is the astral light, which resolves into oil when condensed by a triple fire, and such oil is the universal medicine. It can only be contained by glass, this being a non-conductor for the astral light, its porousness being inappreciable. This secret is reserved to the king, which means an initiate of the first order, for it is truly concerned with a force by which cities can be destroyed. Some important secrets are here indicated with great clearness. In the next chapter, Philostratus speaks of unicorns and says that the horn of these animals can be fashioned into drinking cups, which are a safeguard against all poisons. The single horn of the symbolical creature represents hierarchic unity, and hence Philostratus adds, on the authority of Damis, that the cups in question are also exclusive to kings. Happy, says Apollonius, is he who is never intoxicated but in drinking out of such a goblet. Damis narrates further that Apollonius met with a woman who was white from feet to breasts but black in the upper region. His disciples were alarmed at the prodigy, but the master gave her his hand, for he knew her. He told them that she was the Indian Venus, whose colors are those of the bull Apis, adored by the Egyptians. This harlequin female is magical science, the white limbs, or created forms, of which reveal the black head, or that supreme cause which is unknown to man at large. But Philostratus and Damis knew, and it was under emblems like these that they gave expression in concealment to the doctrine of Apollonius. The secret of the great work is contained in the 5th to the 10th chapters of this third book, and the form of symbolism adopted is that of dragons defending the entrance to a palace of the wise. There are 3 species of dragons, dwellers respectively of marshes, plains, and mountains. The mountain is sulfur, the marsh mercury, and the plain is the salt of the philosophers. The dragons of the plain are pointed on the back, like a sawfish, referring to the acid potency of salt. Those of the mountains have golden scales and a golden beard, while the sound of their creeping movement is like the tinkling of copper. In their head is a stone by which all miracles can be worked. They bask on the shores of the Red Sea, and they are caught by the help of a red cloth embroidered with golden letters. On these enchanted letters they lay their head and fall asleep, and they are then decapitated with an axe. Who does not recognize here the stone of the philosophers, the magistry at the red and the famous regimen of fire, represented by golden letters? Under the name of Citadel of the Wise, Philostratus goes on to describe the Athenor as a hill surrounded by a mist but open on the southern side. It has a well 4 paces in breadth, from which an azure vapor rises, drawn up by the warmth of the sun and displaying all colors of the rainbow. The bottom of the well is sanded with red arsenic. In its vicinity is a basin filled with fire, and thence rises a livid flame, odorless and smokeless, and never higher or lower than the basin edge. There are also 2 reservoirs of black stone, in one of which rain is stored and in the other wind. The rain cistern is opened when there is excessive drought, and then clouds come forth which water the whole country. It would be difficult to describe more exactly the secret serae of the philosophers and that which they term their balneum maris. It follows from this account that the ancient alchemists employed electricity, magnetism, and steam in their great work. Philostratus speaks subsequently of the philosophical stone itself, which he calls indifferently a stone and light. The profane are not permitted to discover it, because it vanishes if not laid hold of according to the processes of the art. It is the wise only who, by means of certain verbal formulae and rites, can attain the Pantarba. This is the name of the stone, which at night has the appearance of fire, being flaming and sparkling, while in the day it dazzles by its brightness. This light is a subtle matter of admirable virtue, for it attracts all that is near it. The above revelation concerning the secret doctrines of Apollonius proves that the philosophical stone is no other than an universal magnet, formed of the astral light condensed and fixed about a center. It is an artificial phosphorus containing the concentrated virtues of all generative heat, and the multitude of allegories and traditions extant concerning it are as testimonies to its certain existence. The entire life of Apollonius, as recorded by Philostratus, following Damis the Assyrian, is a tissue of apologues and parables, the concealed doctrine of great masters of initiation being written in this manner at the period, as already intimated. We know therefore why the recital embodies fables, and underneath the text of these fables we should expect to find, and may even look to understand, the secret knowledge of the Hierophants. His great science and conspicuous virtues notwithstanding, Apollonius was not a successor in the hierarchic school of the Magi. His initiation had India as its source, and he was addicted to the enervating practices of the Brahmins. Further, he preached rebellion and regicide openly. He was a great character in a wrong path. The figure of the Emperor Julian seems more poetic and beautiful than that of Apollonius. He maintained on the throne of the world all the austerity of a sage, and he sought to transpose the young sap of Christianity into the enfeebled body of Hellenism. He was a noble maniac, guilty only of too much devotion to the associations of the fatherland and the images of its ancestral gods. As a counterpoise to the realizing efficacy of Christian doctrine, he called black magic to his aid and plunged into darksome evocations, following the lead of Jamblichus and Maximus of Ephesus. But the gods whom he desired to resuscitate in their youth and beauty appeared before him cold and decrepit, shrinking from life and light, and ready to fly before the sign of the cross. The closing had been taken in full according to the grade of Hellenism, and the Galilean had conquered. Julian died like a hero, without blaspheming him who overcame, as it had been falsely pretended. 1 Ammianus Marcellinus portrays his last moments at length. They were those of a warrior and philosopher. The maledictions of Christian sacerdotalism echoed long over his tomb. Has not the Savior, that lover of noble souls, pardoned adversaries less interesting and less generous than the unfortunate Julian? On the death of this emperor, magic and idolatry were involved in one and the same universal reprobation. At this time there came into existence those secret associations of adepts, to which Gnostics and Manichaeans gravitated at a later period. The societies in question were the depositaries of a tradition of errors and truths admixed. But they transmitted, under the seal of terrific pledges, the great arcanum of ancient omnipotence, together with the ever-frustrated hopes of extinct worships and fallen priesthoods. Chapter 5. Legends. The strange narratives embodied in the Golden Legend, howsoever fabulous they may be, are referable notwithstanding to the highest Christian antiquity. They are parables rather than histories. The style is simple and Eastern, like that of the Gospels. And their traditional existence proves that a species of mythology had been devised to conceal the Kabbalistic mysteries of Johannite initiation. The Golden Legend is a Christian Talmud expressed in allegories and apologues. Studied from this point of view, the newer in proportion as it is more ancient, the work will become of real importance and highest interest. One of the narratives in this legend so full of mysteries characterizes the conflict of magic and dawning Christianity in a manner which is equally dramatic and startling. It is like an outline in advance of Chateaubriand's Martyrs and the Cost of Goethe combined. Justina was a young and lovely pagan maiden, daughter of a priest of the idols, after the manner of Cymodos. Her window opened on a court which gave upon the Christian church, so that she heard daily the pure and recollected voice of a deacon reading the Holy Gospels aloud. The unknown words touched and stirred her heart, so deeply indeed that when her mother remarked one evening how grave she seemed, and sought to be the confidant of her preoccupations, Justina fell at her feet and said, "Bless me, my mother, or forgive me, I am a Christian." The mother wept and embraced her, after which she returned to her husband and related what she had heard. That night in their sleep the parents were both visited by the same dream. A divine light descended upon them, a sweet voice called them and said, "Come unto me, all ye that are afflicted, and I will comfort you. Come, ye beloved of my Father, and I will give unto you the kingdom which has been prepared for you from the beginning of the world." The morning dawned. Father and mother blessed their daughter. All three were enrolled among the catechumens and, after the usual probation, they were admitted to holy baptism. Justina returned white and radiant from the church, between her mother and aged father, when two forbidding men, wrapped in their mantles, passed as Cost and Mephistopheles going by Margaret. They were Cyprian the magician and his disciple Acladius. They stopped, dazzled by the apparition, but Justina went on without seeing them and reached home with her family. The scene now changes and we are in the laboratory of Cyprian. Circles have been traced, a slaughtered victim still palpitates by a smoking chafing dish. The genius of darkness stands in the presence of the magician, saying, "Thou hast called me, I come. Speak, what dost thou require? I love a virgin, seduce her. She is a Christian, denounce her. I would possess and not lose her. Canst thou aid me? I tempted Eve, who was innocent and conversed daily with God himself. If thy virgin be Christian, know that it is I who caused Jesus Christ to be crucified. Thou wilt deliver her into my hands, therefore. Take this magical unguent, and anoint the threshold of her dwelling. The rest concerns me. And now Justina is asleep in her small and simple room, but Cyprian is at the door murmuring sacrilegious words and performing horrible rites. The demon creeps to the pillow of the young girl and instills voluptuous dreams full of the image of Cyprian, whom she seems to meet again on issuing from the church. This time, however, she looks at him, she listens, while the things which he whispers fill her heart with trouble. But she moves suddenly, she awakes and signs herself with the cross. The demon vanishes and the seducer, doing sentinel at the door, waits vainly through the whole night. On the morrow he renews his evocations and loads his infernal accomplice with bitter reproaches. The latter confesses his inability, is driven forth in disgrace, and Cyprian invokes a demon of superior class, who transforms himself by turns into a young girl and a beautiful youth, tempting Justina by advice as well as caresses. She is on the point of yielding, but her good angel helps her. She joins inspiration to the sign of the cross and expels the evil spirit. Cyprian thereupon invokes the king of hell, and Satan arrives in person. He visits Justina with all the woes of Job and spreads a frightful plague through Antioch. The oracles, at his instigation, declare that it will cease only when Justina shall satisfy Venus and Love, who are alike outraged. Justina, however, prays in public for the people, and the pest ceases. Satan is baffled in his turn. Cyprian compels him to acknowledge the omnipotence of the sign of the cross and defies him by making it on his own person. He abjures magic, becomes a Christian, is consecrated bishop, and meets with Justina in a convent. They love now with the pure and lasting love of heavenly charity. Persecution befalls both. They are arrested together, put to death on the same day, and ratify in the breast of God their mystical and eternal marriage. According to the legend, Saint Cyprian was bishop of Antioch, but ecclesiastical history says that his seat was that of Carthage. It matters little, for the rest, whether the personalities are the same. The one belongs to poetry, while the other is a father and martyr of the Church. There is extant among the old grimoires a prayer attributed to the Saint Cyprian of legend, who is possibly the holy bishop of Carthage. Its obscure and figurative expressions may have given credit to the idea that prior to his conversion he was addicted to the deadly practices of black magic. It may be rendered thus: I, Cyprian, servant of our Lord Jesus Christ, have prayed unto God the Cather Almighty, saying, Thou art the strong God, my God omnipotent, dwelling in the great light. Thou art holy and worthy of praise, and thou hast beheld in the old days the malice of thy servant and the iniquities into which I was plunged by the wiles of the demon. I was ignorant of thy true name. I passed in the midst of the sheep, and they were without a shepherd. The clouds shed no dew on earth, trees bare no fruit, and women in labor could not be delivered. I bound and did not loose. I bound the fishes of the sea, and they were captive. I bound the pathways of the sea, and many evils did I encompass. But now, Lord Jesus Christ, I have known thy holy name, I have loved thee, I am converted with my whole heart, my whole soul, and all my inward being. I have turned from the multitude of my sins, that I may walk in thy love and follow thy commandments, which are henceforth my faith and my prayer. Thou art the word of truth, the sole word of the Father, and I conjure thee now to break the chain of clouds and send down on thy children thy goodly rain like milk, to set free the rivers and liberate those who swim, as also those which fly. I conjure thee to break all the chains and remove all the obstacles by the virtue of thy holy name. The antiquity of this prayer is evident, and it embodies most remarkable reminiscences of primitive types belonging to Christian esotericism during the first centuries of this era. The qualification of golden, given to the fabulous legend of allegorical saints, is a sufficient indication of its character. Gold, in the eyes of initiates, is condensed light. The sacred numbers of the Kabbalah were called golden. The moral instructions of Pythagoras were contained in golden verses, and for the same reason that mysterious work of Apuleius, in which an ass has an important role, is called the golden ass. The Christians were accused by pagans of worshipping an ass, and the slander in question is not of their own devising. It is referable to the Jews of Samaria, who expressed Kabbalistic ideas on the divinity by means of Egyptian symbols. Intelligence was represented in the symbol of a magical star, venerated under the name of Remphan. Science was depicted by the emblem of Anubis, the latter name being altered into Nibba. Whilst vulgar faith or credulity appeared in the likeness of Thartak, a god represented holding a book, wearing a mantle and having the head of an ass. 1, according to the Samaritan doctors. Christianity was the reign of Thartak, or blind faith and vulgar credulity set up as an universal oracle, superior to understanding and knowledge. This is why, in their intercourse with Gentiles, and when they heard themselves identified by these with Christians, they protested and begged not to be confounded with the worshippers of an ass's head. The pretended revelation diverted the philosophers, and Tertullian mentions a Roman caricature, extant in his days, which exhibited Thartak in all his glory, identified as the god of Christianity. Much to the amusement of Tertullian, though he was the author of that famous aphorism, Credo quia absurdum. The golden ass of Apuleius is the occult legend of Thartak. It is a magical epic and a satire against Christianity, which the author had doubtless professed for a period. Or so at least he appears to intimate under the allegory of his metamorphosis into an ass. The story of the work is as follows. Apuleius was traveling in Thessaly, the country of enchantments. He received hospitality at the house of a man whose wife was a sorceress, and he seduced the servant of his hostess, thinking to obtain in this manner the secrets of her mistress. The maid promised to deliver to her lover a concoction by means of which the sorceress changed herself into a bird, but she made a mistake in the box, and Apuleius was transformed into an ass. She could only console him by saying that to regain his proper form it would be sufficient to eat roses, the rose being the flower of initiation. The difficulty at the moment being to find roses in the night, it was decided to wait till the morrow, and the servant therefore stabled the ass. But only for it to be taken by robbers and carried off. There was little chance now of coming across roses, which are not intended for asses, and gardeners chased away the animal with sticks. During his long and sad captivity, he heard the history of Psyche related, that marvelous and symbolical legend which was like the soul and poetry of his own experience. Psyche desired to take by surprise the secrets of love, as Apuleius sought those of magic. She lost love and he the human form. She was an exiled wanderer, living under the wrath of Venus, and he was the slave of thieves. But after having journeyed through hell, Psyche was to return into heaven, and the gods took pity on Lucius. Isis appeared to him in a dream and promised that her priest, warned by a revelation, would give him roses during the solemnities of her coming festival. That festival arrived, and Apuleius describes at great length the procession of Isis. The account is valuable to science, for it gives the key of Egyptian mysteries. Men in disguise come first, carrying grotesque animals. These are the vulgar fables. Women follow strewing flowers and bearing on their shoulders mirrors which reflect the image of the great divinity. So do men go in front and formulate dogmas which women embellish, reflecting unconsciously the higher truths, owing to their maternal instincts. Men and women came afterwards in company as light-bearers. They represented the alliance of the two terms, the active and passive generators of science and life. One after the light came harmony, represented by young musicians, and, in fine, the images of gods. To the number of 3, followed by the grand hierophant, carrying, instead of an image, the symbol of great Isis, being a globe of gold surmounted by a caduceus. Lucius Apuleius beheld a crown of roses in the hands of the high priest. He approached and was not repulsed. He ate the roses and was restored to human shape. All this is learnedly written and intermingled with episodes which are now heroic and again grotesque in character, as befitted the double nature of Lucius and the ass. Apuleius was at once the Rabelais and Swedenborg of the Old World at the close of the epoch. The great masters of Christianity either failed or refused to understand the mysticism of the Golden Ass. Saint Augustine in the City of God asks in the most serious manner whether one is to believe that Apuleius was metamorphosed literally into an ass, and seems disposed to admit the possibility, but only as an exceptional phenomenon from which nothing follows as a consequence. If this be an irony on his part, it must be allowed that it is cruel, but if it be ingenuousness. However, St. Augustine, the acute rhetorician of Madura, was scarcely given to being ingenuous. Blind and unfortunate indeed were those initiates of the antique mysteries who ridiculed the ass of Bethlehem without perceiving the infant God who shone upon the peaceful animals in the stable. The child on whose forehead reposed the conciliating star of all the past and future. Whilst philosophy, convicted of impotence, offered insult to victorious Christianity. The fathers of the Church assumed all the magnificence of Plato and created a new philosophy based upon the living reality of the divine Word, ever present in His Church, reborn in each of its members and immortal in humanity. It would be a greater dream of pride than that of Prometheus, were it not at the same time a doctrine which is all abnegation and all devotion. Human because it is divine, and divine because it is human. Chapter 6. Some Kabbalistic paintings and sacred emblems. In obedience to the Saviour's formal precept, the primitive Church did not expose its most holy mysteries to the chance of profanation by the crowd. Admission to baptism and the Eucharist was in virtue of progressive initiations. The sacred books were also held in concealment, their free study and, above all, interpretation being reserved to the priesthood. Moreover, images were fewer and less explicit in character. The feeling of the time refrained from reproducing the figure of Christ himself, and the paintings on the catacombs were, for the most part, Kabbalistic emblems. There was the Edenic cross with the 4 rivers, where hearts came to drink. The mysterious fish of Jonah was replaced frequently by a 2-headed serpent. A man rising from a chest recalls pictures of Osiris. All these allegories at a later period fell under proscription, owing to the Gnosticism which misapplied them, materializing and debasing the holy traditions of the Kabbalah. The The name of Gnostic was not always rejected by the Church. Those fathers whose doctrine was allied to the traditions of St. John frequently made use of this title to designate the perfect Christian. Apart from the great Synesius, who was a finished Kabbalist but of questionable orthodoxy, Saint Irenaeus and Saint Clement of Alexandria applied it in this sense. The false Gnostics were all in revolt against the hierarchic order, seeking to level the sacred science by its general diffusion, to substitute visions for understanding, personal fanaticism for hierarchic religion, and especially the mystical license of sensual passions for that wise Christian sobriety and obedience to law which are the mother of chaste marriages and saving temperance. The induction of ecstasy by physical means and the substitution of somnambulism for sanctity, these were the invariable tendency of those Cainite sects which perpetuated the black magic of India. The Church could do no less than condemn them energetically, and it did not swerve from its mission. It is only regrettable that the good grain of science often suffered when the spade was driven and the flame kindled in fields overgrown by tares. Enemies of generation and the family, the false Gnostics sought to ensure sterility by increasing debauch. Their pretense was to spiritualize matter, but actually they materialized spirit, and this in the most repulsive manner. Their theology abounds in the copulation of aeons and in voluptuous embraces. 1 Like the Brahmins, they worshipped death under the symbol of the lingam. Their creation was an infinite onanism, and their redemption an eternal abortion. Looking to escape from the hierarchy by the help of miracle, as if miracle apart from the hierarchy proved anything but disorder or rascality, the Gnostics, from the days of Simon Magus, were great workers of prodigies, substituting the impure rites of black magic for the established worship. They caused blood to appear instead of the Eucharisty wine and substituted cannibal communions for the peaceful and pure supper of the heavenly Lamb. The arch-heretic Marcos, a disciple of Valentinus, said Mass with 2 chalices. He poured wine into the smaller, and on pronouncing a magical formula the larger vessel was filled with a liquor like blood, which swelled up seething. He was not a priest, and he sought to prove in this manner that God had invested him by a miraculous ordination. He incited all his disciples to perform the same marvel in his presence. It was women more especially whose success was parallel to his own, but when they passed subsequently into convulsions and ravishment, Marcos breathed upon them, communicating his own mania, so that they covenanted to forget for his sake, and for that of religion, not only all prudence but all decency. Such intervention of women in the priesthood was always the dream of false Gnostics. For in so equalizing the sexes they introduced anarchy into the family and raised a stumbling block in the path of society. Maternity is the true priesthood of women, modesty is the ritual of the fireside and the religion thereto belonging. This the Gnostics failed to understand, or they understood it too well rather. And in misguiding the sacred instincts of the mother, they cast down the barrier which stood between them and complete liberty for their desires. The sorry candor of lewdness was not, however, a gift possessed by all. On the contrary, the Montanists, among other Gnostics, exaggerated morality in order to make it impracticable. Montanus himself, whose acrid doctrines inveigled the paradoxical and extremist genius of Tertullian, was given over, with Priscilla and Maximilla, his prophetesses, or, as we should now say, his somnambulists, to all the boundless licentiousness of frenzy and ecstasy. The natural penalty of such excesses was not wanting to their authors. they ended in raving madness and suicide. The doctrine of the Marcosians was a profound and materialized Kabbalah. They dreamed that God had created everything by means of the letters of the alphabet, that these letters were as so many divine emanations, having the power of generating beings, that words were all powerful and worked wonders virtually, as also in literal reality. All this is true in a certain sense, but not in that of the Marcosian heresy. The heretics in question supplemented actualities by hallucinations and believed that they went invisible because they were transported mentally where they wished in the somnambulistic state. In the case of false mystics, life and dream are frequently so confused together that the predominant dream state invades and submerges reality. It is then uttermost rule of folly. The natural function of imagination is to evoke images and forms, but in a condition of abnormal exaltation it can also exteriorize forms. As proved by the phenomena of monstrous pregnancies and a host of analogous facts which official science would do more wisely to study rather than deny stubbornly. Of such are the disorderly creations which religion brands justly under the name of diabolical miracles, and of such were those of Simon, the Menandrians, and Marcos. In our own days a false Gnostic named Vintras, at present a refugee in London, causes blood to appear in empty chalices and on sacrilegious hosts. The unhappy being then passes into ecstasies, after the manner of Marcos, prophesies the downfall of the hierarchy and the coming triumph of a pretended priesthood, given up to unrestricted intercourse and unbridled love. After the Protean pantheism of the Gnostics came the dualism of Marcos, formulating as religious dogma the false initiation prevalent among the pseudo-magi of Persia. The personification of evil produced a god in competition with God himself, a king of darkness as well as a king of light. And there is referable to this period that pernicious doctrine of the ubiquity and sovereignty of Satan against which we register our most energetic protest. We make no pretense in this place of denying or affirming the tradition concerning the fall of angels, deferring herein, as in all that concerns faith, to the supreme and infallible decisions of the Holy, Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman Church. But assuming that the fallen angels had a leader prior to that apostasy, the event in question could not do otherwise than precipitate them into total anarchy, tempered only by the inflexible justice of God. Separated from that divinity which is the source of all power, and more guilty by far than the others, the prince of angels in rebellion could be nothing but the last and most impotent of all outcasts. But if there be a force in nature which attracts those who forget God towards sin and death, such force is no other than the astral light. And we do not decline to recognize it as an instrument in subservience to fallen spirits. We shall recur to this subject, prepared with a complete explanation, so that it may be intelligible in all its bearings and all its orthodoxy. Point 1. The revelation of a great secret of occultism thus effected will make evident the danger of evocations. All curious experiences, abuses of magnetism, table-turning, and whatever connects with wonders and hallucinations. Arius had prepared the way for Manichaeanism by his hybrid creation of a Son of God distinct from God himself. It was equivalent to the hypothesis of dualism in deity, inequality in the absolute, inferiority in supreme power, the possibility of conflict between the Cather and the Son, and even its necessity. These considerations, and the disparity between the terms of the divine syllogism, make inevitable the rejection of the notion. Is there any question whether the divine word can be good or evil, can be either God or the devil? But this was the great dilemma involved by the addition of a diphthong to the Greek word by which it was changed to. In declaring the Son consubstantial with the Father, the Council of Nicaea saved the world. Though the truth can be realized only by those who know that principles in reality constitute the equilibrium of the universe. Gnosticism, Arianism, Manichaeanism came out of the Kabbalah misconstrued. The Church was therefore right in forbidding to its faithful the study of a science so dangerous. The keys thereof should be reserved solely to the supreme priesthood. The secret tradition would appear as a fact to have been preserved by sovereign pontiffs, at least till the papacy of Leo III, to whom is attributed an occult ritual said to have been presented by him to the Emperor Charlemagne. It contains the most secret characters of the Keys of Solomon. This little work, which should have been kept in concealment, came into circulation later on, necessitating its condemnation by the Church, and it has passed consequently into the domain of black magic. It is known under the name of the Enchiridion of Leo III, and we are in possession of an old copy which is exceedingly rare and curious. The loss of the Kabbalistic keys could not entail that of the infallibility of the Church, which is ever assisted by the Holy Spirit, but it led to great obscurity in exegesis. The sublime imagery of Ezekiel's prophecy and the Apocalypse of St. John being rendered completely unintelligible. May the lawful successors of St. Peter accept the homage of this book and bless the labors of their humblest child, who, believing that he has found one of the keys of knowledge, comes to lay it at the feet of those who alone have the right to open and to shut the treasures of understanding and of faith. Chapter 7. Philosophers of the Alexandrian School. On the eve of its extinction, the school of Plato diffused a great light at Alexandria. But, victorious after 3 centuries of warfare, Christianity had assimilated all that was permanent and true in the doctrines of antiquity. The last adversaries of the new religion attempted to check the progress of men who were alive by galvanizing mummies. The time had come when the competition could be taken seriously no longer, and the pagans of the school of Alexandria, unwillingly and unconsciously, were at work on the sacred monument raised by the disciples of Jesus of Nazareth to confront all the ages. Ammonius Saccas, Plotinus, Porphyry, Proclus are great names in the annals of science and virtue. Their theology was elevated, their doctrine moral, their own manners were austere. But the chief and most touching figure of this epoch, the brightest star in the whole constellation, was Hypatia, the daughter of Theon, that virginal and learned girl whose understanding and virtues would have taken her to the baptismal font, but she died a martyr for liberty of conscience when they attempted to drag her thereto. Synesius of Cyrene was trained at the school of Hypatia. He became bishop of Ptolemy, and was one of the most instructed philosophers as well as the best Christian poet of the early centuries. It was he who remarked that the common people always despise things which are of easy understanding, and that what they require is imposture. When it was proposed to confer on him episcopal dignity, he wrote thus in a letter to a friend: "The mind which is drawn to wisdom and to the contemplation of truth at first hand is forced to disguise it, so that it may be rendered acceptable to the multitude. There is a real analogy between light and truth, as between our eyes and ordinary understandings. The sudden communication of a light too brilliant dazzles the material eye, and rays that are moderated by shadow are more serviceable to those whose sight as yet is feeble. So, in my opinion, fictions are necessary for the people, truth being harmful to those who are not strong enough to contemplate it in all its splendor. If, therefore, the ecclesiastical laws permit reserve in judgment, and allegory in mode of expression, I can accept the dignity which is offered me. The condition is, in other words, that I shall remain a philosopher at home, though I shall tell apologues and parables in public. What can there be in common, as a fact, between the vulgar crowd and sublime wisdom? Truth must be kept in secret. The multitude need instruction proportioned to their imperfect reason. It is regrettable that Synesius should write in this strain, as nothing can be more impolitic than to let a reservation appear when one is entrusted with public teaching. As a result of similar indiscretions, there is the common remark of today that religion is necessary for the people. The question is for what people, seeing that no one will tolerate inclusion in this category when understanding and morality are involved. The most remarkable work of Synesius is a treatise on dreams, in which he unfolds the purest Kabbalistic doctrines and appears as a theosophist whose exaltation and obscure style have rendered suspect of heresy. But he had neither the obstinacy nor the fanaticism of sectarians. He died as he had lived, in the peace of the Church, confessing his doubts frankly but submitting to hierarchic authority. His clergy and his flock asked nothing better at his hands. According to Synesius, the state of dream proves the individuality and immaterial nature of the soul, which in this condition creates for itself a heaven, a country, palaces shining with light, or otherwise darksome caverns, according to its inclinations and desires. Moral progress may be estimated by the tendency of dreams, for in these free will is suspended, while fancy is abandoned entirely to the dominant instincts. Images are produced in consequence as a reflection or shadow of thought, presentiments take bodily shape, memories are intermingled with hopes. The Book of Dreams is inscribed sometimes with radiant and sometimes with dark characters, but accurate rules can be established by which they may be decoded and read. Jerome Cardan wrote a long commentary on the treatise of Synesius and may even be said to have completed it by a dictionary of all dreams, having their explanation attached. The whole is to be distinguished entirely from the little books of colportage, and it really claims a serious place in the library of occult science. A certain section of criticism has ascribed to Synesius those remarkable works which appear under the name of Dionysius the Areopagite. In any case, these are regarded as apocryphal and belonging to the brilliant period of the school of Alexandria. They are monuments of the conquest of higher Kabbalism by Christianity, and they are intelligible only for those who have been initiated therein. The chief treatises of Dionysius are on divine names and the celestial and ecclesiastical hierarchies. The first explains and simplifies all mysteries of rabbinical theology. According to the author, God is the infinite and indefinable principle. In himself he is one and inexpressible, but we ascribe to him names which formulate our own aspirations towards his divine perfection. Point 2. The sum of these names and their relation with numbers constitute that which is highest in human thought. Theology is less the science of God than that of our most sublime yearnings. The degrees of the spiritual hierarchy are afterwards established on the primitive scale of numbers, governed by the triad. The angelical orders are 3, and each order contains 3 choirs. It is on this model that the hierarchy should be established on earth, and the Church is its most perfect type. Therein are princes, bishops, and lastly simple ministers. Among the princes are cardinal bishops, cardinal priests, and cardinal deacons. Among prelates there are archbishops, simple bishops, and suffragans. Among ministers there are rectors or vicars, simple priests, and those who hold the diaconate. The progression to this holy hierarchy is by 3 preparatory degrees, being the subdiaconate, minor orders, and clerkship. The functions of all correspond to the angels and the saints. They are to glorify the threefold divine names in each of the 3 persons, because the undivided Trinity is adored in its fullness in each of the divine hypostases. This transcendental theology was that of the primitive Church, and possibly it is attributed to Saint Dionysius only in virtue of a tradition which goes back to his and the apostolic times. Much as the rabbinical editors of the Sefer Yetzirah attributed that text to the patriarch Abraham, because it embodies the tradition perpetuated from father to son in the family of this patriarch. However it may be, the books of Saint Dionysius are precious for science. They consecrate the mystical marriage of antique initiation with the gospel of Christianity. uniting a perfect understanding of supreme philosophy with a theology which is absolutely complete and in all things above reproach.